Hello, I am Jenny Hall for Splitcoaststampers. Today we're going to take a deep look at the ink smooshing technique and add in some really fun mix-in supplies. The basic supplies for ink smooshing are watercolor paper, a spray bottle with tap water, and some paper towels to clean the mess. Our mix-in choices today are going to be Shimmer Paint, Perfect Pearls, and white pigment ink refill. And we'll do our coloring in a few different ways. We're going to use watercolor pens or markers, dye ink pads, distress oxide sprays, and liquid watercolors. Each of these are going to give a different look and a different result with the mix-ins. The basic way that we go out, the basic method for ink smooshing, is to add some sort of a coloring tool, and this is watercolor pens. Put it down to a surface that's not going to absorb it, which would be non-porous. Spray some water to dilute the coloring, and then dip your paper directly down into that big puddle of fluid. It's going to appear on the watercolor paper different than if you would have applied it directly to the paper with a brush. Work in layers, drying in between, and this will also really help you to get built up layers, some fun effects, and some hard lines. Keep dipping it in, and you can keep up getting more and more fun looks. You can see that tiny little splatter dots there. That's going to leave something that's a really fun element to this panel whenever it's used in a project. Let's start off by using some dye ink. These are small mini cubes and they're all in colors of green. I'm adding them down to the non-porous work surface and then adding some white pigment ink in between. I'm diluting it just enough, and then we'll take a piece of watercolor paper, and you can see that it transfers to the watercolor paper, but it's not quite diluted to the point to where it loses the shape. So you can get a pattern directly from what your coloring tool is. And because we use that white ink refill, then it builds up a layer that is, it's like a sheen on the card and on the paper. Another way that you can use this fun technique is on a different colored cardstock. Here it is on black cardstock, and you would have to allow time to let this dry naturally. The next way we're going to look at is with distress oxide sprays and shimmer paint. I'm adding the shimmer paint with a palette knife directly onto my work surface and spraying with two different distress oxide sprays. These are not watered down yet, so that you can see the look of what a fluid looks like together with the shimmer paint. Now adding some water, then we get the colors moving, and you can see that it gives a different result. The oxide ink works a little differently with water than some of the other ones do, and that works really well with the shimmer paint. I think with the shimmer paint and the distressed oxide sprays, it has that oxidized look, but it also has a very high amount of shimmer. So let's take a look at the same ingredients but on a different type of paper. So I'm adding it down to the work surface, and it will all combine to give you a really fun look. Now I could stop there and just have the shiny shimmer paint with the pink, or keep smushing and building it up. Adding more water, more coloring tool. It's your choice with ink smushing. You can start and stop any place you like, but it has a very fun look on the black cardstock. Now let's use liquid watercolors with Perfect Pearls. This was perhaps my very favorite way. Liquid watercolors are really strong and concentrated, and so they will need to be diluted. So I sprayed the work surface first, then put down a few drops of the liquid watercolor, and now I'm spreading around some of the Perfect Pearls. And the Perfect Pearls are going to stay dry until I spray it again, because they're a very fine powder. And once the paper goes on, then check it out. It is so pretty and amazing. There are big clumps of the gold, which would look really great if this panel was allowed to dry and be die cut. Imagine those gold accents. They're just wonderful. And because this is such a strong, concentrated form of coloring, then I can keep adding more panels and keep dipping, and the perfect pearls will continue to dilute further into the fluid and just become more of a shimmer or sheen. Now you can also take the watercolor paper and hold it down into the fluid in different ways. Dragging it across the work surface will give you a different look. You can add it directly with your fingers in certain areas, or dip it down into certain corners that you feel didn't get enough coverage. Another thing that can be done with this different technique is to spray the paper with your squirt bottle, and you can get that fluid moving and diluted even more. Look at this really fun drip line on this paper. We've got a few drip lines going, and I think it's just wonderful. Having the perfect pearls as a mix-in is also gorgeous. Things were not moving around as much, so I gave it a little spray to move it a little bit more. And this is a third panel that I was able to get out of exactly the same inks and shimmer paint. It just works out so easy. You can get so many technique panels out of the ink smooshing technique. And the perfect pearls have diluted enough to where they're interspersed all over. And if you can't see the sheen on camera, the gold sheen is amazing. So let's use a panel on a handmade card and see what we can come up with. I've trimmed it down, and all the measurements will be in the project, and it's completely dry. I've let it air dry. I'm using a stamp from Penny Black, and this is going to be stamped over a few times and is placed in the MISTI because watercolor paper doesn't always accept the stamped image the first time. So I'm using a light gray ink and adding it 2 or 3 times to where there's a nice coverage. And then I'm using a sentiment from Altenew that's a very small in comparison to the panel, and using that same light gray ink. So you can see here that using those beautiful colors on 2 different panels, and it's exactly the same stamps, there's lots of different ways that we can use these panels. Thanks for joining us today at Split Coast. We'll be back again next week with another tutorial for you.